Oh, no, it's not. I think it was years ago, but there are many small industries here, and I suppose tourism is the...
She was one of the most famous women in the world. Grace Kelly went from Hollywood star to real-life princess. People saw her as the perfect fairy tale. But in September 1982, everything changed. Her car crashed on a mountain road in Monaco, and she never came home. For years, the truth stayed unclear, surrounded by silence and questions. Now, her son, Prince Albert II of Monaco, has spoken. His words have brought new attention to what really happened that day, and the mystery that has never fully been explained. The morning everything changed, September the 13th, 1982. It was a perfectly ordinary Monday morning. The kind of late summer day on the French Riviera that feels almost too beautiful to be real. The sky was blue, the road was dry, and Princess Grace of Monaco was doing something she almost never did. She was driving. Grace Kelly hated driving. That is not an opinion. That is something her own family and friends confirmed repeatedly. After she had been involved in a minor car accident in Monaco sometime in the 1970s, she reportedly declared, flat out, that she would never drive again. From that point on, she relied on a chauffeur to take her wherever she needed to go. This was simply how things worked. She was a princess. There was always someone available to drive. So why was she behind the wheel on September 13th, 1982? The answer, as far as we know it, is frustratingly simple. The car, her 11-year-old metallic green Rover P6 3500, was absolutely packed. There were boxes, bags, hat boxes, and dresses draped across the back seat. Princess Stephanie, her 17-year-old daughter, was traveling with her. They were coming down from Roc Aigle, the family's country estate in the French Alps above Monaco, heading back to the palace so that Stephanie could catch a train to Paris and start school the very next day. There simply was not enough room for the chauffeur. And so, Grace dismissed him and got behind the wheel herself. That decision, that single, practical, unremarkable decision, would change everything. At approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, a truck driver following Grace's car on the D37 highway watched in horror as the Rover began to swerve. The car zigzagged across the narrow road. The driver blew his horn. For a moment, it seemed like the car was pulling back under control. And then it wasn't. The Rover accelerated. It was picking up speed, not slowing down. It shot toward a hairpin curve, hit the retaining barrier, broke through it, and tumbled more than 120 feet down the mountainside, crashing into the flower garden of a local farmer named Sesto Lecquio. When rescuers arrived, the car was upside down. Stephanie was found struggling to get herself out through the driver's side window. Grace was unconscious, bleeding heavily from a wound on her forehead, completely unresponsive. Within minutes, police and an ambulance arrived. And that is when the real story, the one the public was never told, begins. What the palace said versus what was actually happening. In the immediate aftermath of the crash, the Monaco Palace issued statements to the press and to the public suggesting that Princess Grace's injuries were not life-threatening. Broken bones, they said. A broken thigh bone, a broken collarbone, some rib injuries. Seriously, yes, but survivable. The world was reassured. What the palace did not say was that Grace Kelly had lost consciousness in the car and had never regained it. She arrived at Monaco Hospital at approximately 10:30 in the morning and was already in a coma. Doctors gave her virtually no chance of recovery from the moment she was admitted. This gap between what the palace was saying publicly and what was actually happening behind the hospital doors has never been fully explained, and it is one of the details that Albert, in various interviews over the years, has acknowledged without ever quite explaining. He has spoken of the chaos and grief of those hours. of being a young man of 24 trying to process the unprocessable. But the question of why the world was misled about his mother's condition, that one has lingered, unresolved, for more than 40 years. Then there is the matter of the car. Within half an hour of the crash, according to investigators who later looked into the case, the Rover was covered with plastic sheets and removed from the scene. Police photographers were reportedly not given adequate time to properly document the crash site. The car was whisked away to an undisclosed location. Jacques Bidalou, a former French judge who spent more than 2 years and thousands of his own dollars investigating Grace Kelly's death, was blunt about what this meant. He called the handling of the crash scene a cover-up. He pointed out that the accident had happened on French territory, meaning French authorities should have been the ones leading the investigation, but Grace was transported to a Monaco hospital, which was far less equipped than nearby French medical facilities. By the time she received a proper CAT scan, which revealed the catastrophic bleeding in her brain, precious hours had already passed. Would earlier, better medical care have saved her? That question cannot be answered with certainty, but it is one that has haunted everyone who has ever looked closely at this case: the life support decision. On the evening of September 14, 1982, approximately 36 hours after the crash, Prince Rainier III, together with his children Princess Caroline and Prince Albert, authorized the doctors to switch off Grace Kelly's life support. Stephanie was not included in that conversation. She was still in the hospital herself, recovering from a fractured vertebra in her neck, and she was not told of her mother's death until 2 days after it happened. She did not attend the funeral. Albert was 24 years old when he made that decision alongside his father and sister. 24 years old, sitting in a hospital in Monaco, agreeing to let his mother go. And then, 6 days later, he sat in that cathedral, the same one where his parents had been married 26 years earlier, and covered his face with his hands in front of the entire world. Dr. Louis Chatelain of Monaco Hospital confirmed that Grace had suffered 2 strokes. The first one, doctors believed, occurred before the crash, possibly while she was still driving, and caused her to lose control of the vehicle. The second stroke happened as a result of the crash itself. Combined, they caused irreversible brain damage. She was, medically speaking, already gone before the decision was made. But here is where it gets complicated. Because if Grace suffered a stroke behind the wheel, if she blacked out while driving and simply could not stop the car, then the accident was a medical tragedy. A heartbreaking, random, devastating piece of bad luck. And that should be the end of the story. Except it isn't. Who was really driving? Here is something that the official version of events has never fully resolved. When first responders arrived at the crash scene, Princess Stephanie was found trying to escape the wreck through the driver's side window. Not the passenger's side, the driver's side. Now, the explanation that eventually settled into the public record is that the passenger door was simply impassable, too badly damaged in the crash for Stephanie to get out that way. So she went through the other side. That makes sense, except that at least one eyewitness at the scene claimed to have seen Stephanie driving before the crash, not Grace. And the fact that the gear shift was found in the park position, not a position you would typically find it in if the driver had been fighting to control the car, raised further questions. Stephanie herself, in later interviews, has spoken about these moments with raw, unresolved confusion. She remembered her mother saying she had a headache. She remembered something changing suddenly. She tried to pull the handbrake. She even said years later, "Did my mother confuse the brake pedal with the accelerator?" I don't know. Think about that. The person who was in the car, the only living witness to what actually happened in those final seconds, still does not know for certain what happened. There is also this. Grace Kelly was known to despise driving. She had sworn off it after an accident in the 1970s. The idea of her voluntarily getting behind the wheel for a challenging, winding mountain descent was, by multiple accounts, unusual. Some close to the family found it genuinely surprising, and no one, not the palace, not the police, not the subsequent investigations, has ever been able to fully explain why, if the chauffeur could not fit in the car, Grace did not simply arrange alternative transport. She was a princess. She had options. Stephanie, for her part, has always maintained that her mother was the one driving. And the majority of accounts, including a police officer who reportedly saw the car pass before the crash, support the version that Grace was at the wheel. But the question has never been completely laid to rest. And the reason it hasn't, the reason it still comes up decades later, is that if Stephanie had been driving, and if the palace knew that, it would explain a great deal about the chaotic, inconsistent handling of information in the hours and days after the crash. Stephanie was 17. She did not have a driver's license, the rover, and the brakes. After the crash, British Leyland, the company that manufactured the Rover P6 3500, sent their top engineers to examine the wrecked vehicle. The car had been removed from the crash scene and was being stored in an undisclosed location. The engineers investigated the possibility of brake failure. They found no mechanical fault. Their official conclusion was that the car's brakes were functioning properly at the time of the accident. But here is the critical detail. Their findings were never made fully public. Whatever they found, or did not find, was never independently verified, because the car had already been removed from the scene under circumstances that prevented proper forensic examination. By the time any official investigation wanted access to the vehicle, the window for gathering meaningful evidence from the crash site itself had closed. What we do know is what Stephanie reportedly told her sister, Princess Caroline, immediately after the crash, that her mother had kept saying, "I can't stop. The brakes don't work. I can't stop." If those words are accurate, they raise an obvious question. Did the brakes fail? Or was Grace suffering the early effects of a stroke, her perception distorted, her body not responding the way her brain expected? The doctor's conclusion supports the stroke theory, but the brake engineer's report was never fully transparent, and no autopsy was ever performed, no autopsy, on one of the most famous women in the world after a violent, sudden, unexplained death. None. Former French judge Jacques Bidelou called this the most alarming fact of the entire case. He filed a civil lawsuit in a Nice court demanding an official investigation. It was rejected. The theories, mafia, cover-ups, and what the family knew. When the palace stays silent and the investigation stays incomplete, conspiracy theories fill the vacuum. And in the case of Grace Kelly's death, the theories have been extraordinary. The most persistent of them involves the mafia. Grace Kelly's own brother, Jack Kelly, who has since passed away, reportedly said in the immediate aftermath of her death that he believed organized crime was involved. A former French judge. A brother. These are not fringe figures. The theory goes like this. By the early 1980s, Monaco had become a significant hub for money laundering, and criminal organizations with interests in the principality saw Princess Grace as a threat. She was principled, she was internationally respected, and she had the ear of her husband, the ruling prince. If she was pushing to clean up the way Monaco operated behind the scenes, she would have been a problem for the wrong people. Jacques Bidelou spent years building this case. He claimed to have uncovered evidence that the mafia had ordered Grace eliminated. He wrote to Prince Rainier about it. He received no reply. Prince Rainier, for his part, dismissed this entirely. He told author Geoffrey Robinson that he could not imagine any reason why the mafia would want to harm Grace. And in the absence of hard evidence, that is where the theory has always remained, in the realm of the unproven, the uncomfortable, the unanswered. Then there is the theory about the argument. The summer of 1982 had been a tense one for the Monaco royal family. Stephanie, then 17, had fallen in love with a young man named Paul Belmondo, the son of French film star Jean-Paul Belmondo, and she wanted to marry him. Grace was opposed. The mother and daughter had reportedly been fighting about this throughout the summer, and those close to the family say the relationship between them was strained. Were they arguing in the car that morning? Stephanie has denied it, but the question matters because an emotional argument, with raised voices and a distracted driver on a winding mountain road, could explain erratic driving without requiring a stroke, a mafia hit, or a mechanical failure. It is, in some ways, the most human of all the explanations, and the most difficult to prove or disprove. Grace's health in her final weeks. There is another piece of this puzzle that has been largely overlooked in the decades of theorizing. Grace Kelly's health in the months before the crash. Her daughter Caroline, in accounts excerpted in the Chicago Tribune, said plainly that Grace had not been well that summer. She was incredibly tired, Caroline said. The summer had been very busy. She hadn't stopped going places and doing things all summer long. She'd done too much. There were also reports, later denied by doctors, that Grace had been suffering from high blood pressure. She was going through menopause. She was 52 years old and, by the accounts of those who were with her that summer, running on empty. On the morning of the crash, Stephanie remembered her mother complaining of a headache before they even left Rock Angel. This detail is crucial. A headache in context is not just a headache. Doctors who later reviewed the case noted that a sudden, severe headache, sometimes described as the worst headache of a person's life, can be one of the warning signs of a cerebral hemorrhage. Grace Kelly may have been experiencing the early stages of a stroke before she even got in the car that morning. If that is true, then the accident becomes, in some ways, even more tragic. She may not have had any real chance. She may have been running out of time before she even said goodbye to the chauffeur and buckled her daughter into the passenger seat. The funeral the world watched. On September 18, 1982, 5 days after the crash, the world came to Monaco to say goodbye. Princess Diana was there. Nancy Reagan represented the United States. Danielle Mitterrand, wife of the French president, was seated nearby. Cary Grant, one of Grace's oldest friends from her Hollywood days, sat in the cathedral where, 26 years earlier, he had watched her marry a prince. He was reportedly inconsolable. The service lasted 75 minutes and was watched by approximately 100 million people on television. Prince Rainier wept again and again throughout. Princess Caroline, also weeping, turned toward her father. And Prince Albert, 24 years old, dressed in black, the future ruler of Monaco, sat with his face buried in his gloved hands and did not look up. The person who had been the heart of the Grimaldi family, the woman who had given up one fairy tale to live another, was gone. And the questions that surrounded her death were just beginning. Albert speaks. Prince Albert II of Monaco turned 68 in March 2026. He has been the ruling sovereign of Monaco since his father's death in 2005. He has built his own legacy as an environmental advocate, an Olympic athlete, a father, a husband. He has given hundreds of interviews and made thousands of public appearances. But when the subject turns to his mother, to the crash, to the questions, to the rumors, something shifts. The carefully maintained composure of a head of state gives way, briefly, to something more raw, something more honest. Over the years, through a series of interviews and public statements, Albert has addressed the circumstances of his mother's death more directly than most members of the Monaco royal family ever have. And what he has said, taken together, amounts to a quiet but significant confirmation of several things that the palace spent decades trying to keep ambiguous. On his father's grief, In one of the more candid moments Albert has shared publicly, he spoke about the effect of Grace's death on his father, Prince Rainier. Albert said that his father was never quite the same man after losing Grace. He was deeply, profoundly affected, in ways that went beyond normal grief and never fully healed. Prince Rainier, who died in 2005, reportedly told friends in the years after Grace's death that he had been broken by it. Albert confirmed this directly. His father, he said, wasn't quite the same man as he was before. This is not a small detail. It tells us that behind the palace walls, behind the measured public statements and the official narratives, there was devastation. Real, lasting, private devastation. The kind that does not come from a death you fully understand and have made peace with. The kind that comes from a loss you cannot explain, cannot process, and cannot move past. On the decision to remove life support. Albert has never spoken lightly about the decision made on the evening of September 14, 1982. He has acknowledged over the years that he was part of that decision, along with his father and Caroline. At 24 years old, he sat with his family and agreed to let the machine stop. He has said that Grace was already brain dead, that the doctors had made it clear there was no possibility of recovery, that keeping her alive artificially was not something any of them could justify. But he has also said that it took years, many years, to come to terms with all of it. It always takes a while, he said in a 2017 interview. You recover thanks to your other family members and to your friends, and to people who are dear to you, who can provide comfort. It also takes a few years to really come to terms with it. A few years. For Prince Albert, that process was still ongoing, years after most people would have expected a resolution. That, in itself, says something. What Albert has and has not denied. Here is where things get most interesting, because Albert, over the years, has done something subtle but significant. He has addressed some of the rumors directly, and notably, has not denied others. He has spoken about the stroke. He accepts the medical conclusion that his mother suffered a cerebrovascular incident behind the wheel. He has spoken about how her health that summer was not good, about how exhausted she was, about how the accident, in medical terms, is understood as a consequence of a sudden neurological event. But the question of the car, the question of why it was removed from the scene so quickly, the question of why no autopsy was performed, questioned by the misleading statements issued by the palace in the hours after the crash. On these points, Albert has been notably, consistently, carefully quiet. In reality, he has not explained the removal of the car or the denial of access to investigators. What he has done is acknowledge the weight of it all, the complexity, the imperfection of how it was handled. He has spoken, quietly and with obvious pain, about a family trying to navigate a catastrophic, sudden tragedy, while the entire world was watching and making choices that, in hindsight, left too many questions open. He has also, in recent years, been direct about one thing that the palace resisted acknowledging for a long time. The sheer severity of what happened to his mother was not properly communicated in those early hours. The gap between what the public was told and what was actually happening was real. He has not fully explained it, but he has stopped pretending it did not exist. What? Albert confirmed about Stephanie. One of the most emotionally significant things Albert has confirmed is the burden his younger sister has carried since 1982. Stephanie, who was in the car, who survived, who was not told her mother had died for 2 days, who was not well enough to attend the funeral. She has lived with the weight of that day for over 4 decades. Public opinion, in the immediate aftermath of the crash, was not kind to Stephanie. The rumor that she had been driving, that an unlicensed 17-year-old had somehow caused the accident, and that the palace had covered it up, followed her for years. People blamed her. She has spoken publicly about the guilt she felt, saying that people seemed to feel she must have caused it because Grace was too perfect to make a mistake. Albert has been consistent and firm in defending his sister. He has spoken about the unfairness of the suspicion directed at Stephanie and about the very real psychological damage it caused her, and by doing so, by acknowledging that the confusion around who was driving was real, that the public speculation was real, that the impact on Stephanie was real. He has implicitly confirmed that the original handling of the crash created the exact conditions for that rumor to take hold and cause harm. If the palace had been transparent from the beginning, if the car had not been removed, if the public statements had been accurate, if an autopsy had been conducted, much of what Stephanie suffered could have been avoided. What it all means. Prince Albert has spent 40 years walking a very narrow line. He is the sovereign of a principality. He is the son of a legend. He is the keeper of a story that the world has never stopped wanting to understand. And he has had to balance, for his entire adult life, the private truth of what he knows against the public responsibility of what he can say. What he has confirmed, piece by piece, interview by interview, year by year, is this: his mother's death was not fully explained to the public at the time. The handling of the situation, from the crash scene to the hospital to the palace statements, was imperfect, chaotic, and in some ways inadequate. The questions that have lingered for decades are not the product of conspiratorial thinking. They are the product of real gaps, real silences, and real decisions made in real crises that were never properly accounted for. He has confirmed that his father never recovered. He has confirmed that his sister suffered. He has confirmed that the official story, while not a lie in its broad strokes, was incomplete in ways that mattered. He has not confirmed the mafia theory. He has not confirmed brake sabotage. He has not confirmed that Stephanie was driving. But he has confirmed something perhaps more important than any specific theory: that the full truth of what happened on that road on September 13th, 1982, has never been completely told, and that for a family that lost its heart that morning, the wound never fully closed. The woman behind the myth. Grace Kelly was born in Philadelphia on November 12, 1929. She made her first Hollywood film at 22, won an Academy Award at 25 for The Country Girl, and married a prince at 26. She gave up the most glamorous career in the world for a life of duty, protocol, and a marriage that, by many accounts, was more complicated than the fairy tale it appeared to be. She founded charities, raised children, served her adopted country, and quietly built a life that was, in many ways, far harder than her radiant public image suggested. She died at 52. She never got to see her children fully grow up. She never met her grandchildren. She died on a Tuesday, removed from life support, in a hospital in a country she had moved to as a young bride, with the world still not knowing how seriously she had been hurt. In her last television interview, recorded just 3 months before the crash, in June 1982, she was asked how she would like to be remembered. After a long pause, she said, "I would like to be remembered as trying to do my job well, of being understanding and kind." She did not mention the films. She did not mention the Oscar. She did not mention the palace, the crown, or the title. Just kindness. Just doing her job well. Her son Albert has spent his life trying to honor that, trying to protect her legacy while being honest about the imperfection of how her death was handled, trying to give his sister the defense she deserved, trying, in his own careful way, to tell the truth without burning down the institution he was born to lead. At 68, he is older now than his mother ever got to be. He has lived the years she was robbed of, and when he speaks about her, about the crash, about what he knows, about what he has carried, you can still see it. The 24-year-old in the cathedral, the young man in the black gloves, his face in his hands, they just become more familiar. If this story left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. The mystery of Grace Kelly still lingers decades later. Let us know what you think really happened. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that history never fully explained.